It's been a long time coming, but a new Pokemon generation is finally out, and I think that is a perfect time for me to talk about this. This game's made a cameo before in a video of mine, but I've never actually showed any gameplay of it. It is time. Pokemon bootlegs come in all shapes and sizes, but one thing is uniform across pretty much all of them, and that's the fact that, they don't make no sense. Today, I'm gonna be taking a look at a bunch of Pokemon bootlegs and bootleg hacks that don't make no sense. So sit back, relax, and strap in, because this train's going straight to bootleg town. But first, let's take a quick stop at Sponsored Town to talk about today's sponsor, Dashlane.
I don't know about any of you, but I admittedly have the worst memory ever, and it doesn't help that now every website under the sun requires different criteria for an acceptable password, making it impossible to remember them, let alone which ones are for which accounts. Like, I don't know how I'm supposed to remember a password that requires a capital, lowercase, Japanese kanji, special character, hieroglyphics. Dashlane eliminates all of that. With Dashlane, you can have a one-stop service for all of your devices for securely saving and one-click autofilling not only your slew of respective passwords, but various other typically tedious things like addresses and credit card information, all while working seamlessly between devices. Personally, Dashlane has made it way easier for me to keep track of all my passwords via one master password, so I don't have to go through the forgot password routine for the 10 billionth time. Dashlane has made managing my passwords a lot less of a headache, and I know it can for you too.
If you'd like to give Dashlane a try while also helping support my channel, you can use my link down below to download Dashlane for free on your first device and get a free 30-day trial of Dashlane Premium. Now on to the bootlegs.
So first up is a game I've had for years. I don't even remember where I picked it up anymore. I'm assuming I probably found it at a flea market or something, but who knows at this point? Maybe eBay? I don't know. I actually owned the cartridge for many years before I ever actually booted it up, and I remembered when I finally did, I realized not only does the label make absolutely no discernible sense, but the game itself is a bootleg Pokemon ROM hack. I've seen a few different versions of this floating around, but mine is just called Pokemon. And what they basically did here is take a pre-existing platformer and replace the title screen and player character sprite. That's it. As far as I can tell, everything else seems to be normal outside of the title screen and the fact that you get to play as Charmeleon, whom I can only assume Matt Groening did the pixel art for. Things of this nature usually just end up being buggy, glitchy trash, but I'm actually a little mad to say this is really good. It's not mind-blowing or anything, but instead of the typical janky, broken mess I was anticipating, I spent an hour playing an actually pretty competent game in the vein of run-and-gun platformers like Mega Man. It's got relatively tight controls, fair platforming challenges, occasionally clever mechanics, decently fun boss fights, and a surprisingly really forgiving live system. The game can be a bit challenging, but almost any time you lose a life or get a game over, you actually don't end up just starting the entire stage over. Checkpoints are generous, and to my surprise, I even respawned right back at boss arenas after dying, even after getting a game over. Given that information, I'm not exactly sure what the point of a game over even is then, but I'm not gonna look a gift horse in the mouth. I actually got pretty far in the game. I think I may have gotten up to the final boss, or at least a boss of some greater importance. Unfortunately though, the fight was at the end of a pretty long level that in its own right was pretty involved and contained a bunch of mini-bosses. Once I died, it warped me all the way back to before one of the mini-bosses I fought, which was surprising considering what's happened when I got game overs before. After that, I realized I needed to move on, but yeah, Prince Banana 2 gets my seal of approval, I guess. So all the info I was able to find about this next game says it's called Pokemon Green, but according to the title screen, it's just called Green. That's my favorite game, Green, starring, this. This is yet another bootleg ROM hack where they took another game, shoved a Pokemon in, and called it a day. In this one, you play as a Clefairy, and if you're wondering why it's green, turns out this is actually a hack of a game in the Hello Kitty universe starring whatever that frog thing's called. They didn't bother to mess with the color palette, so now we have a green Clefairy in a game called Green. Alright. Oddly enough, after playing this for a bit, either this game originally was made by the same studio who made Felix the Cat on the NES, or this game was already ripping someone else off to begin with. It's got a lot of the same sound effects, same transitions when finishing stages, even the music fades out when you approach the end of the stage, just like it does in Felix the Cat. Enemies flip upside down when you defeat them. I swear, it must be running on the same engine. Well, upon further research, it took a little digging, but despite both games saying they were made out of different studios, turns out a Japanese developer by the name of Shimada Kikaku was actually responsible for both Felix the Cat and this game, as well as some other Hello Kitty games, so I guess there's my answer. This game reminds me a lot of Felix, but just a lot less good. The controls are loose and not precise, especially when needing to land on small platforms because for whatever reason, you get propelled forward seemingly at random during your jump arc, which you pretty much just need to adjust to. I can't understand why this was implemented or what its purpose was. There isn't really much to say outside of that. It's not completely terrible, but it's just a very slightly below mediocre platformer that doesn't run super well, except now you get to play as a green Clefairy because China. I'm not sure if the original version ran better, but this one sure doesn't. Also, Wispy Woods is here for some reason. Despite Pokemon games being handheld titles, not many Pokemon bootlegs were made for the Game Boy. This is the only one I'll be covering in this video, and it's a Game Boy Color game called Pocket Monster Sapphire? Sapphire. Pocket Monster Sapphire. Don't let the name fool you though, this isn't any kind of version of Pokemon Sapphire. This is a Pokemon-themed strategy RPG akin to something like Fire Emblem or Advance Wars. It features all your favorite Pokemon, like Piku, Mumleaf, Fireball, Rat, and even Little Crocodile. I gotta say, this is definitely not my type of game, and it's super tedious, but from what I can tell, it's actually not half bad for what it is. The gameplay, anyway. Can't say the same about everything else. Like the story, which I can barely read because of how the format of the text is. The font is enormous, and the text box is so small that every other word gets cut off and then continued on the next line without even a hyphen or anything. I can't really understand what the story is. All I know is that it definitely has at least something to do with magic babies and complicated problems. But according to the text, we may be able to get out of all these problems in a whole skin. I'm gonna go out on a whim and say English probably wasn't this translator's first language, or second, or third. Over the years, I've seen repro carts of this game floating around what seems like every single convention I go to. At one point or another, some random studio in China decided to try to port Pokemon Yellow to the Famicom. I have no idea why, but here we are. Now, there is a translation patch for this game, which not only translates it from Chinese to English, but also fixes some color palette and balancing issues. I, however, want the full-on bootleg experience though, so we're playing the vanilla version. Unfortunately, that also means that beyond my normal knowledge of how Pokemon games work and how menus are laid out, I really have no idea what's going on. Because of this, I wasn't able to figure out how to catch any more Pokemon since I, for some reason, couldn't buy Pokeballs. I even bought every item in the shop thinking one of them had to be Pokeballs, but it turns out I was wrong. As far as I can tell, this is at least somewhat accurate to the layout and pacing of the original Game Boy game. That being said, I could only get up to Brock and couldn't actually beat him. Well, actually, not so much couldn't, but more so wouldn't. What happened was, since I couldn't catch any more Pokemon, I was stuck with only Pikachu. I thought I'd be able to just strong-arm my way through once I got Quick Attack, but that's not how this went down. I ended up not only buying every potion I could, but wasting them while fighting Brock. I used up all my money, and I couldn't buy any more potions or battle any trainers to earn more money, so I pretty much just gated out of any kind of normal progression. My only option is to slowly grind until my Pikachu is a god. I'm not doing that. This is basically just Pokemon Yellow, only way jankier, if you can possibly believe that. From the same studio who brought you Pokemon Yellow for the Famicom comes Pokemon Gold for the Famicom. They, for some reason, decided to make a sequel, and in some ways it's better, but in most ways it's worse, and the whole thing is enigmatic to me. For example, it sticks closer to the layout of the game it's trying to emulate, but in pretty much every other regard, it's a downgrade. If you want an example of what I'm talking about, immediately after obtaining my Cyndaquil, the first wild Pokemon I ran into was a level 4 Meganium. I think that tells you all you need to know. Also, for whatever reason, despite the sprite work in the Pokemon Yellow bootleg looking, as far as I can tell, original, this game ripped a bunch of sprites and assets straight from the Gen 1 Pokemon games. Coupled with that is some of the slowest movement I've ever seen in an RPG, and for whatever reason, it seems as though all the directional movements have this, odd input delay. The game also just sporadically decides to make you run at seemingly random intervals. Unlike the previous game, I did manage to beat the first gym leader, but that has a lot less to do with any kind of skill and more so due to the fact that the game is broken and I played it for about 40 minutes while literally just tapping A the entire time. Also, I'm not sure if you've been paying attention to the music that's been playing this whole time, but the music is probably the thing that drove me to stop playing. Not that I wanted to keep going anyway, but the music is dissonant and quite honestly unbearable to listen to. This one might just be the strangest one of the bunch. Initially, I had thought this was another sprite swap, but upon further research, that's apparently not the case. Its origin is a little unknown, but it's another Famicom platformer, but this one, as far as I can tell, is wholly original and not a ROM hack of something else. It's called Pocket Monster and features Pikachu running around a bunch of platforming stages, and it's just about the jankiest of the jank. I know I called some of the other ones janky, but we're setting the bar here. The screen scrolls akin to an early PC side-scroller before PCs could really do scrolling screens, but apparently that's not due to the scrolling camera and is more of an issue to do with Pikachu's movement itself, because the camera is locked to him. I was able to find this out because for some reason there's basically something kind of like a feature that's in Sonic the Hedgehog's debug mode, wherein you can pause the game and then just kind of move around and drop the player wherever. It's not exactly the same as it is in Sonic, but it's very similar. When doing this, the screen scrolls just fine. Upon doing this, I found no real reason to play the game properly when I can just hold right. Eventually, I realized that pressing the select button while in this mode just straight up skips the stage, which, by the way, are all apparently super long. Using this, I just kinda kept skipping stages till I got to the boss of whatever world I was in. Turns out the bosses are actually Pokemon too, but the sprite art is so bad I didn't even realize it until I fought the last boss, who was very obviously a Blastoise. I also didn't realize I was on the final boss either, because the music never changed to something more dire, and once I beat him, it just kind of said end, while Pikachu teeters back and forth like he had a few too many elixirs. Come to think of it, I don't blame him, because I think after this, I'm gonna need a few myself. Hey, thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, there's a couple other videos on the screen right there you can check out. And if you want to see more, subscribe so you can see when I upload, maybe. And also, I have a Patreon if you want to help support the channel.